Imagine a world where the oceans have dropped by hundreds of feet, revealing a massive grassy bridge connecting Siberia to Alaska. A lost continent larger than the state of Texas that existed for thousands of years before being swallowed by the rising tides at the end of the last ice age. For decades, archaeologists have searched this underwater ghost world for the true story of how the first people reached the Americas. We had the stone tools and we had the geological data, but we were missing the most important piece of the puzzle: the people themselves. That all changed when researchers discovered a tiny set of remains at a site called Upward Sun River in Alaska. These are the only human remains ever found in the heart of what was once eastern Beringia. But when the results of the DNA analysis finally came back, they didn't just solve the mystery, they shattered the existing timeline of human history. A group of people who stayed behind while everyone else moved south. Who were these people? And why did their genetic lineage vanish from the face of the earth? To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we have to look at the traditional Clovis first theory that many of us grew up with. The idea was that about 13,000 years ago, a group of hunters followed mammoths across the land bridge, found a narrow corridor through the melting glaciers, and sprinted all the way down to South America. It was a neat, linear story. But the Upward Sun River remains, belonging to an infant who lived 11,500 years ago, tell a much more complicated and fascinating tale. When the geneticists sequenced the full genome, they expected to find a direct match for modern Native Americans. Instead, they found something they weren't prepared for. This child belonged to a group now named the ancient Beringians. They were a distinct lineage that split off from the ancestors of all other indigenous Americans nearly 20,000 years ago. This discovery means that while the glaciers were still towering walls of ice, a massive group of humans stayed in the north for nearly 10,000 years. They didn't just pass through Beringia, they lived there, thrived there, and developed their own unique culture and genetic identity. While the ancestors of the Aztecs and the Incas were moving south through the interior or along the coast, the ancient Beringians remained in the subarctic tundra. They were a lost branch of the human family tree that stayed in the lobby of the New World for thousands of years. This changes Beringia from a simple highway into a biological and cultural incubator. The DNA of this infant is like a Rosetta Stone for human migration. It shows that the split between East Asians and the first Americans happened around 36,000 years ago. Then, about 20,000 years ago, the ancient Beringians split from the group that would eventually populate the rest of the continent. But here's the puzzle that is keeping researchers up at night. Why is there no trace of this DNA in modern populations today? Most modern indigenous groups in North and South America are more closely related to each other than they are to this ancient Beringian child. It's as if a whole nation of people lived in Alaska for 10 millennia, and then simply faded into the shadows of history. Think about the conditions these people endured. Alaska was a world of extremes. They were surrounded by megafauna, giant short-faced bears, woolly mammoths, and ancient bison. The Upward Sun River site itself gives us a window into their daily lives. This is the earliest evidence of salmon fishing in North America. These weren't just desperate wanderers. They were sophisticated foragers who understood the cycles of the environment. They built hearths. They buried their loved ones with slate tools and antler foreshafts. And they lived in a landscape that was constantly changing as the ice melted and the sea levels rose. The genetic data suggests that Beringia wasn't just a bridge, it was a refuge. During the height of the last ice age, much of the northern hemisphere was a frozen desert. But Beringia was a refugium, a place with enough vegetation and animal life to support human populations. This is known as the Beringian standstill hypothesis. The idea is that the founding population of the Americas was stuck in this region for thousands of years, isolated by glaciers on one side and the ocean on the other. During this isolation, their DNA changed, becoming distinct from their Siberian cousins. The Upward Sun River remains are the first and only physical proof that this standstill actually happened. But the plot thickens when we look at the interaction between these groups. The DNA shows that after the split, there was still some level of contact. The ancient Beringians and the group that moved south occasionally crossed paths. But as the centuries wore on, the two groups became more and more distinct. Eventually, the group that went south, the ancestors of modern Native Americans, split into two branches, northern and southern. The northern branch eventually moved back up toward Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. This is where the mystery reaches its peak. When the southern descendants moved back north, they seem to have replaced or absorbed the ancient Beringians. Science is now trying to figure out if this replacement was a peaceful integration or a competition for resources. The subarctic landscape was changing fast. The open grasslands turned into dense boreal forests. Replaced by moose and caribou, small groups of people who were specialized in hunting one type of prey might have struggled to adapt to the new forest environment. Did the ancient Beringians simply fail to keep up with the changing ecosystem, whom the local indigenous community named Exitiana Nation Tadga, which means sunrise girl child, was found alongside another infant? The two infants were cousins, and they were laid to rest with great care. This reveals a deeply emotional and ritualistic side to these ancient people. They weren't just carbon-based units moving across a map. They were families who dealt with loss and honored their young. The presence of these remains in a hearth suggests that the camp was a place of habitation for a long time. They built their homes and their lives around these central fires. Analyzing the DNA of such ancient remains is a monumental task. The researchers had to deal with highly degraded genetic material that had been sitting in the acidic Alaskan soil for over 11,000 years. Using a technique called next-generation sequencing, they were able to reconstruct the entire genome from tiny fragments. This is the biological equivalent of putting a shredded newspaper back together. The results were verified multiple times, because the implications were so disruptive to the established theories. The scientists had to admit that their maps of human migration were far too simple. Instead of a single wave of people, we are looking at a complex, pulsating movement of groups splitting, staying, moving, and merging. One of the most surprising things about the DNA of the ancient Beringians is their relationship to a group known as the ancient North Siberians. This group, known from a 34,000-year-old site called Yana, contributed to the ancestry of all first Americans. But the ancient Beringians kept more of this ghost Siberian DNA than the groups that moved south. This tells us that the ancient Beringians were the original inhabitants of the land bridge, the ones who stayed closest to the source. They were the guardians of the gateway. Imagine the perspective of an ancient Beringian. For hundreds of generations, your people have lived in the shadow of the great glaciers. You know every valley, every salmon run, and every mountain pass. Perhaps you see groups of people passing through your territory, heading south toward a land you've only heard stories about, a land where the ice ends. You choose to stay. You are the people of the north. But as the world warms and the sea swallows the land bridge behind you, you are suddenly isolated. The vast plains you once called home are now under the Bering Sea. You are on the edge of a new continent, and you are alone. This isolation is what created the unique genetic signature of the ancient Beringians. But isolation is a double-edged sword. While it creates a distinct identity, it also makes a population vulnerable. A small group in a changing environment can be wiped out by a single bad season or a lopsided conflict with a larger group. By the time the ancestors of the current Athabascan-speaking peoples arrived in the region, the ancient Beringian lineage was already on the wane. Their genetic ghost is only found in these ancient remains, a silent testimony to a branch of humanity that successfully navigated the Ice Age but could not survive the peace that followed. The research was conducted in close collaboration with the local Healy Lake Village and Tanana Chiefs Conference. For the modern people of Alaska, this discovery adds a massive, previously unknown chapter to their history. It shows that their land has been a home to human beings far longer than anyone realized, and that the history of the North is a tapestry of multiple, distinct groups who all contributed to the story of the Americas. Looking deeper into the genetic markers, researchers found that the ancient Beringians lacked some of the adaptations found in the groups that moved to Central and South America. For instance, they didn't have certain genetic variations linked to high-altitude living or specific tropical disease resistances. This makes sense, as they never left the subarctic. They did show incredibly efficient metabolic pathways for processing high-protein, high-fat diets, essential for surviving in a world where your primary food source is fat-heavy fish and large game. They were biologically tuned to the Ice Age. The Beringian standstill wasn't just a pause in a journey, it was a flourishing of life in an unexpected place. During this time, the first American languages were likely being forged. Some linguists have pointed to similarities between the Deni languages of North America and the Yeniseian languages of Central Siberia. The DNA of the upward Sun River child, provides the chronological and geographical window where these linguistic links could have been solidified. While the people were standing still in Beringia, their culture was evolving. Their stories were being told, and their worldview was being shaped by the unique light of the Arctic sun. But then, the world changed. A massive influx of meltwater from the retreating glaciers poured into the oceans. The sea level rose rapidly, and the Bering Plain began to disappear. The land bridge was being severed. For the ancient Beringians, this meant their connection to Asia was gone forever. They were now truly the first Alaskans. Shortly after this, the northern branch of the southern migrants began to push back up from the south. The genetic data suggests a pulse of migration that saw these southern groups moving into the territory of the ancient Beringians. What happened when they met? We don't see signs of violence at the sites, but we do see a change in tool technology. The older microblade technology of the Beringians was gradually replaced by different types of projectile points. In the world of archaeology, a change in tools often means a change in people. The DNA shows that the ancient Beringian lineage did not contribute much to the modern people living in the area today. This suggests that the newcomers didn't necessarily merge with the residents. They might have simply occupied the same niches more effectively, leading to the gradual disappearance of the original lineage. It's a haunting thought. A group of people survives 10,000 years in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, only to vanish just as the world becomes easier to live in. The ancient Beringians are truly a ghost population. They exist only in the data, in the tiny fragments of DNA rescued from the Earth. But their existence proves that the settling of the Americas wasn't a single event. It was a multi-stage drama with winners, losers, and people who simply chose to stay behind. Scientifically, we are still in the early stages of understanding this. The Upward Sun River site is just one point on a massive map. We need more remains from other parts of Beringia to see if the ancient Beringians were a single, uniform group or if they too were split into different cultures. The problem is that most of Beringia is now under the sea. Underwater archaeology in the Bering Strait is incredibly difficult and expensive. We are essentially trying to reconstruct a continent by looking at its highest, remaining mountain peaks, which is what modern Alaska and eastern Siberia are. Every time technology moves forward, we are able to see a little further into this dark curtain of time. New protein analysis is being used to look at the types of plants and animals these people were eating in even more detail. We can even look at the isotopes in the child's teeth to see exactly where she was born and if her mother moved long distances during her pregnancy. This level of detail transforms Exake Dianan Td Gay from a scientific specimen into a real child who lived, was loved, and died in a world that was both terrifying and beautiful. The mystery of why their DNA vanished remains the biggest puzzle. Some scientists suggest that the population was simply too small. In any small, isolated population, genetic drift can lead to the disappearance of certain lineages over time. It's a bit like a name in a small village. If every family with that name only has daughters, the name disappears, even if the people are still there. It's possible that the ancient Beringians were absorbed into the larger incoming groups, but their specific genetic brand was lost in the massive sea of new DNA. They are still part of the story, but their unique voice has been muffled by the louder voices of the groups that conquered the rest of the continent. But there is another theory, the back migration. Some researchers think that as Beringia flooded, some ancient Beringians might have headed back west into Siberia. If they did, their DNA might be hiding in some of the remote populations of northern Asia. We haven't found it yet, but the search is on. If the ancient Beringians moved in both directions, it would paint an even more dynamic picture of human movement, where people weren't just fleeing a flooded land, but actively choosing their path based on their ancestral connections. If you are listening to this, you are part of a generation that is seeing the first true map of human history. For thousands of years, we only had legends and ruins. Now we have the software of life itself. The DNA of the Upward Sun River site has given us a name for a people who were nameless for 11,000 years. The ancient Beringians. They were the pioneers who saw the glaciers melt and the seas rise. They were the ones who saw the end of the Ice Age from the front row. And even though their genetic line went quiet, their story has finally been heard. As we continue to dig, to scan, and to sequence, we realize that the human story is never as simple as we think. It sets not a straight line from point A to point B. It's a messy, beautiful, complicated web of connections. The ancient Beringians were a vital strand in that web. They tell us that humanity is a species of survivors, people who can find a home in a frozen tundra and stay there for 10,000 years because it's their land. They remind us that the Earth is always changing, and that our history is often buried in places we can no longer reach. The Upward Sun River site is a sacred place, and it's being treated with the respect it deserves. The research is a partnership between the past and the present, between scientists and the descendants of the people who stayed in the North. It's a reminder that every discovery in archaeology is a journey into our own identity. We are all descendants of survivors. We are all part of a lineage that navigated the unknown. The ancient Beringians might be ghosts, but they are our ghosts. They are part of the family. The puzzle of their DNA is a call to action for future researchers. We need to look closer at the edges of the map. We need to investigate the submerged shelf of the Bering Sea. We need to find more upward sun rivers. Only then will we know the full extent of the ancient Beringian world. Was it a series of small, isolated clans or a vast network of traders and hunters? Did they have their own unique art, their own gods, their own music? The DNA gives us the biology, but we are still searching for the soul of Beringia. What we do know is that these people lived in balance with a landscape that was disappearing beneath their feet. Every year the coast got closer. Every year the familiar plains were swallowed by the gray waters of the north. Their resilience is staggering. Imagine the stories they told their children about the land that once existed to the west. Stories of a world where you could walk to the sunset without ever seeing the sea. For the ancient Beringians, Beringia wasn't a land bridge. It was just home. As the video comes toward its central realization, ask yourself, what will remain of our civilization in 11,000 years? Will we leave behind a genetic ghost that puzzles future scientists? The ancient Beringians left almost nothing. Some stone tools, a few hearths, and the remains of their children. But that was enough. It was enough for us to find them, and to recognize their place in history. It proves that no one is truly forgotten as long as we keep looking. The DNA of Exitianan, Tiadgazian is a bridge across time, just as Beringia was a bridge across space. It connects us to a world of ice and mammoths, a world of dramatic change and incredible human bravery. It reminds us that our ancestors were much more than just primitive. They were explorers of the highest order. They were the ones who looked at a frozen, unknown continent and said, "This is where we will stay." This is the legacy of the ancient Beringians. And it's a legacy that is just beginning to be understood. The genetic analysis also revealed something about the health and family structure of this lost group. The two infants found together were not sisters but cousins, likely related through their mothers. This points to an extended family structure that was close-knit. In the harsh environment of the subarctic, you couldn't survive alone. You needed your kin. This social cohesion is what allowed them to endure for 10 millennia. Their group was their world. Researchers are now looking at other sites in Alaska with fresh eyes. Maybe some of the tools we previously attributed to the ancestors of the Athabascans were actually made by the ancient Beringians. Maybe their influence on the subsequent cultures was deeper than we thought. Even if their specific DNA lineage ended, their knowledge of the land, their fishing techniques, and their understanding of the Arctic seasons likely passed into the new groups that arrived. In a way, they are still present in the wisdom of the people who live in Alaska today. The story of the ancient Beringians is a powerful reminder of how much we still have to learn. We think we know our history, but then a single discovery in a riverbank in Alaska changes everything. It teaches us to be humble and to keep searching. The earth is full of secrets, and Beringia is one of the biggest. The ancient Beringians didn't just survive an ice age. They defined it. They were the people of the standstill, the watchers of the bridge, and the first to call this new world their one and only home. If we can take one thing away from this genetic puzzle, it's that history is always more diverse than we imagine. The Americas weren't a blank slate. They were a complex landscape of different peoples and cultures from the very beginning. The discovery of the ancient Beringians is a celebration of that diversity. It's a recognition that every group that crossed that land bridge, or stayed on it, added a vital chapter to the human story. They may be gone, but their signature is written in the silence of the North, and we are finally learning how to read it. As the northern lights dance over the Upward Sun River today, the land looks very different than it did 11,000 years ago. The glaciers are gone, the mammoths are memory, and the forests are thick, But the story of the children in the hearth remains. It's a story of a lost branch of humanity that finally found its way into the light of the 21st century. The ancient Beringians may have been forgotten by time, but they have been found by science, and their puzzle continues to inspire us to look deeper into who we are and where we came from. This discovery is a testament to the power of interdisciplinary science. Only by combining the tools of archaeology, genetics, geology, and linguistics could we ever hope to find these ghosts. It shows that the future of understanding our past lies in collaboration. No single field can tell the whole story. We need the geneticist to read the code, the archaeologist to find the hearth, and the local community to provide the cultural context. When these forces come together, the results are nothing short of revolutionary. The ancient Beringians were the first true northerners of the New World. They were the people who thrived where others feared to go. Their life on the edge of the world is a testament to the incredible flexibility of the human species. Whether it's the high desert, the deep jungle, or the Arctic tundra, we find a way, we adapt, we survive. Like the ancient Beringians, we stay long enough to become something entirely new. Even if their lineage puzzles us today, their presence 11,000 years ago is a resounding statement of human capability. So as we finish this investigation into the DNA of Upward Sun River, let's remember Exekete Anantiti Gai. She was just an infant, but she has changed the way millions of people think about the history of our planet. She is the voice of a vanished people, a people who lived in a lost continent and survived against all odds. Her DNA is a gift from the past, a puzzle that keeps our curiosity alive, and our quest for knowledge moving forward. The ancient Beringians have returned to tell their tale, and it's a story that will be told for generations to come. The map of the human journey is being redrawn, and it's more beautiful and complex than ever. The mystery of the ancient Beringians is a reminder that we are all part of a much larger narrative. We are just one moment in a vast timeline of human existence. The ghosts of Beringia are our brothers and sisters, our ancestors, and our teachers. They remind us that nothing is ever truly lost as long as we have the will to find it. Their DNA remains a puzzle, but every piece we fit into place brings us closer to understanding the true nature of our origins and the incredible journey that brought us to where we are today. The silence of Beringia has been broken, and the story it tells is one of the most remarkable in the history of our world. As science marches on, we can only hope to find more clues in the permafrost, more remains, more tools, more genetic signatures that will help us understand how these ancient Beringians lived and why they left. Every discovery is a window, and the view through this one is clear. We are a species of endless wanderers and stubborn stayers, always finding our way through the ice and the dark toward the next upward sun. The journey continues, and the ghosts of Beringia are with us every step of the way.